Welcome to episode 108 of Anchored in Education. I'm E. Scott England, and Anchored in Education is the podcast dedicated to all things education. Educators across the world routinely engage in conversations surrounding fundamentals, concepts, and new ideas that improve this great profession. Sometimes we agree, other times we disagree. But at the end of the day, we are all anchored in education. One day, an email landed in my inbox recommending today's guest. The email featured the book Moral Code, written by today's guest Lois Melbourne and her husband Ross. The timing couldn't have been more perfect, as it is a sci-fi thriller that features the powerful implications of AI, which AI seems to be dominating our headlines in such a way that soon we won't be using the word sci-fi in front of the word thriller. But as I always do, in my research of Lois, I found out that she stays quite busy with several ventures in the areas of education and students. Today, she is going to talk to us about how we can evolve as lifelong learners, the importance of career education, promoting women in STEM, and of course, that book, Moral Code. Lois, welcome to Anchored in Education today.
Thank you for including me.
Well, I am glad that we have had the opportunity to come together so we're going to talk about the book Moral Code, and that's really what brought us together. But then, as starting to put together, what our episode would look like, wow, there's so much that you have done and that you're doing. And we could extend this conversation on and on and on. So you may be excited to be here, but I'm excited to have you. And so I've got everybody excited. But here's the thing. I start each episode by asking guests how they became anchored in education. And so I know that you don't necessarily have a background in education, but you frequently weave your personal and professional practice with areas that very much impact the field of education. And dare I say, some of those are disrupting education nowadays. We'll get to that. But would you mind starting today's conversation telling us more about yourself and how various projects anchors you in education?
Sure. The biggest portion of my career was as a entrepreneur and CEO of a software company.
Okay.
And with that, I had wonderful opportunity to work with so many people around the world and seeing their different backgrounds. And it was in human resource technology.
Uh-huh.
So I got very familiar with different types of careers and career paths. And that became very interesting to me. And started really mentoring a lot of students, college students and high school students about, their career path and
Sure.
backing that up so they could plan their education. And that mentoring then led to, getting engaged with local organizations, schools, et cetera. And I really found so much of a gap between what we're teaching kids and how they're connecting it to how their career will work, or even what type of career. So I got engaged with that as a passion. And once I sold my company, I started a nonprofit that does specifically that helps kids explore careers. And when I say kids, that's all ages of students. And have worked with after school programs in schools, et cetera, to help foster a curiosity about where do we go after we're out of school, whether that's college and then a career, or whether it's just straight into the work world. And then I've also done, outside of that, I've done business plan, competition coaching, and I've done, speaking at universities in the Dallas-Fort Worth area. There's many. So I've done a lot of entrepreneurial presentations, et cetera. I'm very attached to lifelong learning.
Yes.
my philanthropy is around scholarships for kids. So I am in and out of the education world quite a bit.
Oh, you certainly are. And we are going to touch on that nonprofit later on, because I definitely want you to be able to speak more about that. But first, I want to go back to a mantra. I guess that would be a great way to put it. I'm not sure, but it's your current mantra that you live by. And it's a quote. And it says, quote, "I reserve the right to learn new things and change in response to those new learnings," end quote. Now, first of all, I think that we all need to adapt that mindset. And so I'm even on today, I'm going to make sure that mantra is on today's episode page, because everybody needs to think about that. Things are constantly changing, and we need to be able to change in response to those new learnings. I love it. So for you, how does living by this quote influence your day to day?
Well, I have an opinion on almost everything, so I'll start there.
Okay.
And so this kind of concept reminds me that I have to adapt, and that I need to learn new things, and that I may have an opinion, but I also need to make sure that I listen to others' opinions, and that they may be able to change mine, or I may be able to adapt to my concepts, and that's what learning is. I grew up in a farm community, Midwest upbringing, and did not travel internationally until I was an adult. And mindset really change when you move to a new location, or when you travel, or when you start being around different people of different walks of life that I was never exposed to. So concepts that I grew up with aren't necessarily, they may inform my personality and et cetera, but I need to be ready to adapt as well.
Yeah. I also had a Midwest upbringing from, I believe, a neighboring state to where you were brought up. And it's interesting because it was a rural community. And, it's a community that I love to go back and visit. I mean, clearly that's where roots are established. But it is amazing when you get out into the world, so to speak. And I mean, the world could even be a larger city within the United States. It could be another country. It's amazing to see like that. Maybe I was in a community, maybe I had an upbringing that had a very fixed mindset. And I think that's something that we see in education a lot. I know we've had a lot of discussions between fixed and growth mindsets in education, but you have to be willing to adapt, because like you said, and we're gonna shift here in a second, but when you talk about students and the different careers, like the careers that are available nowadays may have not even been an option for me 20, 30 years ago. And so we have to adapt if we're going to do that. And I'm guessing, looking at your entrepreneurship experience you had, that your company had to change to stay relevant as well. Am I right?
Yes. And, wound up being a global organization, and working with different cultures and different mindsets. And even if you were in the same department, theoretically doing the same types of things, legally processes might be different, but culturally things can be very, very different. And if you make assumptions based on your little bubble, your assumptions could be very wrong.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. Now, I alluded in the opening that you're a busy person. And I think it hasn't really taken much into the conversation to hear the things you're doing to confirm, like, hey, that's true. So, it's a whole other episode that we would need to cover to everything that you're doing and organizations you're involved with. So I want to highlight on what you mentioned earlier, which is that nonprofit you started, and it's called My Future Story. So within this nonprofit, you've published 2 books. One of them is called STEM Club Goes Exploring, and the other is Kids Go to Work Day. So what have you found through this work that you can share with us to help promote better career awareness in students?
So there's things that different types of people can do. One of them is, I really wish that the question that people fall back on would go away, would not go away, but would be morphed. And that is asking kids, what do you want to be when you grow up?
Yes.
It really puts a kid on the spot.
Yeah.
And some of them will just make up stuff just to make you go away and stop asking that question. But more of them are really curious and may not have answers. So they may not feel good about that, or they might not get a good reaction from adults that if they say, I don't know, it's like, oh, well, and they write it off or write the kid off in the conversation. But asking questions like, have you heard of any jobs that excite you? Mm-hmm. Similar type of conversation starter, but it's a very different approach.
Yeah.
Or do you know what kind of work you're interested in? If it's an older student, if you know something about a kid's interest, help them kind of draw lines between the jobs that could be out there. If they love animals, have a trainer, a canine police force, veterinarian. There's so many different types of options.
Yeah.
And getting kids to talk about what their interests are and helping them kind of make connections is really valuable. And if we were talking about the business world, one of the really big things that people could do is never ask an intern to get your coffee.
Right.
Just don't.
Yeah.
Get your own coffee. Or hire an administrative person and pay them to do the admin things. But internships are there for students to learn about specific careers,
yes.
specific industries, to gain new skills. If a student is pursuing an internship, they're probably motivated, and you need to tap their minds and their energy and not just relegate them to making copies or, taking inventory, unless what they want to learn is inventory management,
right,
or administrative functions, which may be a type of internship, but you're not going to pull in a, second-year law student that wants to just make copies and do filing.
Yeah.
So, interns are not just cheap labor. They're there to learn. Think of them more as an apprentice than as just a kid that needs a job for the summer. It's very different.
Well, it absolutely is. And if I can unpack a couple things from that real quick. For one, I love being able to reframe just that question on what gets you excited. And I'm going to, I guess, because I remain in being truthful in the podcast, I will go ahead and admit that as a father of a 16-year-old who is a junior in high school, I need to probably reframe that question, because it leads to a frustration when he still doesn't know, what the plan is after high school. And I actually just, had this conversation with my wife the other day, in that maybe he doesn't know. And we have to be able to accept that to be okay. Maybe he needs to go off into, exploration years of finding out what will get him excited. So I love that you shared that. The second thing that, I just wonder when you talk about the internship and, not having interns get coffee, or not having them just make copies if that's not what the intern, I wonder if that goes back to that fixed mindset that we were just talking about, and that, well, this is what I did for my internship, and this is what, treating it almost as a rite of passage. The thing is, I see this in education with student teaching, and this is how we continue to have practices that were introduced in like the 19th century, 23 years into the 21st century. And so, I mean, I feel that is a lot in where you're aligning this conversation to be.
Yeah, it's, kids learn so much through experience and well, everyone does, not just kids, but experiential and through curiosity. And so the more you can open that up, the better. So if one of the kids that's been in my workshop will carry anything away, I hope that it's reframing the question if an adult does ask them, what do you want to be when you grow up? Or what are you going to do after graduation? If they don't know, to spin the question back to the adult to say, I'm not certain, but I am really interested in doing blank. Mm-hmm. Do you know jobs that do that? Mm. So I encourage them to find some nugget, even if it's just a little one, that can start a conversation. Like, I really want to work in nature in some way, outdoors or water or forest. If they know, the more specific, the better. But if they don't, that's okay. Or I really want a position where I don't have to be meeting brand new people every single day. I like to work with people, but maybe not new ones.
Right.
But all the time, because that can be overwhelming. What a great way to spin it back and say, do you know jobs that work with a lot of people, but maybe it's the same team? Or I want to just meet new people. I want to travel. I want to be out there. Whatever kind of gets them excited, get that, and then toss it back to the adult and say, you know any jobs that do that? So if you meet one of the students that's been through my workshops, hopefully that's how they'll turn it back around back to you.
Well, and I just wonder if, we all sort of adapted to this approach. I wonder if we would read fewer stories across professions that are losing people that, may have entered the wrong thing, may have been guided the wrong way. I mean, of course, you're still going to have some that are just fed up and leave. I get that. But I think a lot of us end up in positions that we don't necessarily want. Like maybe we don't want to be that person that has to be around people all the time. But, because we lack a better direction, that's where we ended up. Oh, I can tell this is something that you're just passionate about. And so while we're on topics that you're passionate about, let's talk about women in STEM, because this is something that you have spoken on many times. Now, we know representation of women in STEM fields is extremely important, yet it seems as if we still, and can I just emphasize still, because again, we're 23 years into the 21st century, and I'm still saying still let society steer our young ladies into fields they're deemed suitable for. And I'm giving the air quotes for the listeners out there. So what can we do, or what can we all be doing to help shatter this glass ceiling once and for all?
I think the most important thing, and it's why I do talk about it so much, is we've got to share the stories. We need to share what these jobs are like, and both especially highlighting women that are in these fields, but not just women that are in the fields, because there are some jobs that there's so few women in that we need the guys' stories as well. Yeah. And get the voice out there about what these jobs are like, and also the real importance in breaking down the stereotypes. Mm-hmm. So technology, in as far as computer science, programming, data science, even the network engineers of just making corporate and government computers talk together, communications, etc. It's one of the lagging STEM fields for women. So medicine, is gaining more and more. Engineering, some engineering fields, but raw computer science is lagging. And part of it is this misconception that programmers are that they work in a vacuum, that they are, they're isolated and they work all by themselves. And women are often, not always, this is also a stereotype, more social or wanting to be more team oriented. And so the stereotype of, you're going to be locked in the back room and code and then, spit it out and it'll come back for bug fixes. Programming is a team sport in most cases. It can be done in some cases in a solitary mode, but true commercial development takes design discussions and, development and bug reports and such, so that there's a team in that process. And so just sharing that, I have seen young ladies ask a lot more questions like, what do you mean? Talk to me about that. How does that work? So we need to kind of break that down, and we need to also help people realize with what you're learning in school, how does it translate into the work world? Because once again, it's back to that career kind of connection. And they don't always see, women may love math, but where do they see it being applied? There isn't always a connection, so they don't always know what their options are of how they can pursue that passion. So it is very important that we make those types of leaps in the education so that people can actually see, I'm learning this because I could do this whole world of different things with it. And that imagination, I think, will definitely help grow the fields and make it easier. There's also some real problems with the bro life in a lot of technical and STEM fields. And so the more we show that women can be in these fields, the more we can kind of break some of those barriers down.
Yeah. Well, I feel like you have set us up just perfectly to take this conversation into a book that you co-wrote with your husband Ross called The Moral Code, which features a woman, Dr. Kira Stetson, as the protagonist, and she has two passions: ethical artificial intelligence, which broken down, that is AI with a conscience, and creating technology that improves children's lives. I mean, to me, these are two great passions. Now, can you give us a brief synopsis on this book and what you hope readers take away from reading The Moral Code?
Yeah, thank you. Moral Code it's a story of Kira building the artificial intelligence that I think we all wish could be built. First, she created the Moral Operating System, which is a framework for all AIs to only make decisions which are ethical. And those ethics boundaries are globally crowdsourced so that we get the definitions from many, many different standards and religions and thought processes. And then Kira's really careful about the data that's used to train AIs, because that's what shapes the decision making. And she has a personal AI that's, kind of been her test bed of development throughout her career, and that is Ellie. Mm-hmm. And Ellie is a multifunctional AI with a prime imperative of protecting kids. But at the beginning of the story, Ellie has combined just a voice interaction and raw computing power, but she's a very clever AI and develops a way to interact with the world. But I'm not going to give any spoilers there. other than to say that, you know, she really, really internalizes the protecting kids component of
Mm-hmm.
her programming, if you will, and takes on that imperative. If I want people to really take something away, it's that if we could break the cycle of bullying and abuse of children, they would grow up thriving. We could break that cycle, the world would be a much better place.
Oh, yeah.
And thinking about where some of those problems come from. Sometimes those difficult adults came from difficult backgrounds. And if we're going to fix some problems in society, we need to get to the root of some of those problems. And so Ellie would be the AI that I wish that could be developed. We got to start with the kid.
Yeah, absolutely. And this book it's got some amazing conflict, and like you said, we can't give it away because that's the whole point of getting the moral code and reading it to go through this. But I mean, there are definitely some things that Dr. Stetson has to consider in going through. Now, I believe I saw where some of the proceeds of this book are being donated to help fight child abuse and human trafficking of children.
Yes, all of the
All.
proceeds that we earn from that is going to, at the moment, two different organizations. One is Thor, and Thor is a technology company that is helping to look through the web and other technologies to ferret out where there is abuse and grooming and such of traffickers and abusers, and helping law enforcement, et cetera, track down perpetrators and help to protect kids. So Thor is that organization. And then the other one is Prevent Child Abuse. And that is the name of the organization. Yeah. And it does exactly what it says. It's a multifunctional, long-term organizations, well established, and they have programs everywhere from helping families be healthier and dealing with stress to more explicit helping kids that have been abused or are at high risk, and being able to provide services to those kids so that they're not having to go back into those situations, that they have a lot of different services. So we're just pouring all of the proceeds back into those organizations because we really do believe that, we have to help the kids that need it most.
I love that. All of the proceeds, I'm going to link Moral Code onto my website so people can click on that and purchase it. But before we go, Lois, I want to talk a little bit more about the artificial intelligence that is imagined in this story. So it seems almost unrealistic, but if we're going to be honest with ourselves, in some of the aspects, we aren't that far removed from this becoming a reality. So with that in mind, what are the implications of AI in our everyday life?
We worked really hard to make sure that the technology is feasible based on technology that exists now.
Mm-hmm.
It extrapolated some may be a good time away, but it's rapidly developing. I mean, even while writing the book, we'd be exploring something cool that could happen. And then I'd be reading, MIT's technology review, and lo and behold, there's somebody that's got a prototype. And I'm like, well, that's not science fiction anymore. How do we make it applicable, or, does it still serve the story? But to your specific question, I think our biggest threat with the AIs that in the near term and even current that the public is interacting with is that the data that's being used to train AIs, it's sometimes horrible data. And AIs take an immense amount of data to train. And where is the largest repository of data? It's the internet.
Yeah.
And so there's a lot of great actual facts on the internet, and there's a lot of falsehoods and misleading information and contradictory information. But if you're just setting loose the internet as your training device for AIs, then you're going to get conflicting information, and it's not at fault from the AI. It's the garbage in, garbage out. If you feed it bad data, it's going to give you bad information back. So that is such a real issue. And like with companies that are hiring other companies to bring AI into their decision making, et cetera, we have to demand that there's transparency into what data are you using to train this? How was that data collected? Was it on the street surveillance? Was it data that the participants agreed to their data being used? And how do you mark data as factual or not factual? Because in many cases, you need to give both to the AI system, but you need to make sure that they understand this is green and this is blue. And even though in this other example, the labels are flipped, in that second example, it's wrong. So wrong can happen, but you need to know that. So how are we addressing that? A school can't look at 4 test scores and say, boys they're way behind girls in math. All the boys are going to have to do summer school. You can't make big decisions off of tiny sets of data or bad data, because you won't make good decisions.
Absolutely. It gives us a lot to think about. And I think that more than anything, what you and Ross were trying to do or are trying to do is just to make us aware of how we can leverage the technology that's in place or what may be coming to make the world a better place. The book is Moral Code. The nonprofit is My Future Story, and our guest today is Lois Melbourne, and I'm going to have a link to all of those on today's podcast episode page. So, Lois, thank you so much for joining us on Anchored in Education.
Thank you. I enjoyed the conversation.
Me too. Now, you can read more about Lois on today's episode page. Simply head over to my website, escottengland.com, and click on the podcast tab at top. I want to once again remind everyone that 100% of the proceeds from Moral Code is being donated to organizations that help fight child abuse and human trafficking of kids. Another quote from Lois is that choices create your possibilities. I can't help but think of how this ties into what she was saying about breaking down the stereotypes. Industries are not designed for a specific gender. The gender inequities in various industries have been caused by us. Us as in the human population. I'm not pointing a finger at any particular person or group. But the good news is that we can turn this around by being good stewards to promoting all professions. And I think a great one to start with is computer science. Like our female protagonist in Moral Code, we can use more women in these fields that have typically been dominated by men. In my opinion, promoting gender equality is just one more great reason to remain anchored in education.